My name is Kim Bussey. I'm the Key Relationship Manager. I'm very excited to say that if you are looking for HRCI Continuous Ed credit, all of our Lunch and Learns are now HRCI accredited. So you will be receiving a certificate if you stay for the full session. That is your hook and your incentive, in addition to getting some wonderful information as well. Let's go ahead and get started. So toxic employees, really, does one bad apple really spoil the bunch? How important is it to know who your toxic employees are? When we need to handle that confrontation, when do we need to allow them to say, maybe this isn't a good fit anymore? Well, according to a Cornerstone report, good employees are about 54% more likely to quit when they work with a toxic employee. So think about that. By a show of hands, how many of you have worked with someone who you would consider toxic? I know I have. And with that is something that, at times you just dread coming into work. You have that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. You want to go ahead and say, oh no, here comes Kim. Don't make eye contact. And as leaders, it's something that we do need to make a point to talk with them and to manage this toxicity. We set the groundwork for that. And Max Lucado has this great quote. It says, conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. And for me, I really look at this as leaders, we have to manage the conflict, and it's going to happen. But where toxic employees really begin to take hold is when that combat becomes evident. So we are going to be interactive. I'm going to be asking you some questions. We're going to have some comments, have some polls. So let's go over to a poll real quick. And in one word, just think of one word. How would you describe a toxic employee? So maybe you think they're just, that word that you say is they are negative all of the time. What are some of those words that you would use to describe that toxic employee? And I see them coming up. Entitled, disconnected, ooh, demoralizing. Negative is really hitting the mean. They're poison, exhausting, lazy, depressing. Yeah, no one wants to be around them. So by far and away, we see negative. And when we think about that negativity, then you can connect in where people don't want to be connected to them. I like that frustrating. So I'm seeing some themes here. That toxic employee across the board, and with everything else that has been added, the manipulative, they're unhappy, they're combative, they drain the energy, can be summed up in one of those three categories, right? They're either negative, they're mean, it's frustrating to work with them. And so what do we do with that? How do we manage that? Well, first, we have to understand that when we're looking at our employee, when we're looking at our employee base, there's something that always comes into play, and that is people. We have our different personalities, and it's key for us as leaders is to understand that what one person feels is toxic, others may not. And that could be because our workplace is very diverse. It's because we bring in, different backgrounds, different work ethics, different work experiences. We also bring in our natural behavioral traits. So whereas someone may be very analytical and may automatically go to worst case scenario because they want everything to be perfect, we need to understand as leaders what are those obstacles and what are those pitfalls that come with these differences. So maybe it is that top performer who thinks that they're too important and too busy to care. Or you have that person who's like, this drama is so immature. Oh, by the way, millennials are immature. I don't care. They're the 20-something hipsters. Why do we even hire them? Maybe you have that person who just wants to focus on the work. So the small talk is something that really, why do we have to get to know each other? Why do we have to have these team building? And for that, some of those people, it may just be their natural behavioral trait. So as leaders, you have to understand what that is. You have to understand what they're looking for. you have to understand is what is really toxic and what is something that may be something that is a coaching issue. And we're going to talk about that today with understanding that, understanding their strengths, understanding their challenges, as well as understanding your challenges as well. And then we're going to give you some practical tips to put into place. So all of us have a leadership style, and regardless of what our leadership style is, we have to deal with people. So for me, I would be considered that visionary leader. So I'm very big picture, fast paced, relational. I like to be around people. I'm expressive and let's just get excited, and assertive. I know what I want to happen. However, if I'm working with someone who needs a lot of attention to detail, or you know what, Kim, you're just a little bit too happy most of the time. Can you bring it down a little bit? As a leader, I'm doing them a disservice. And I could automatically think that, you know what, these people are toxic. Maybe, maybe not. But let's talk about this. One, how do you manage toxic employees? So are you that person who wants to avoid them as much as possible? You treat them pretty consistently regardless of their performance. So whether they're a top performer, a mid performer, or a lower performer, if they're toxic, they get treated the same way. Go ahead and select that. Or are you that person who just coaches them? You manage them right out the door. Because at the end of the day, we're going to give you some tools on how to coach them and how to understand their natural preferences. But if they choose not to change, then you have to go back to saying, okay, am I willing to lose some good employees, some consistent employees to deal with this one person? And a lot of times we just kind of want to bury our head in the sand and say, no, I don't want to deal with it. But we can't. As leaders, we don't have that option. We can't really go, shh, I'm hiding from negative people today. But I love the fact that most of you you manage them consistently and you know who they are. Now, knowing who they are, is it because of your personal experiences with them, or is it because you're hearing from your team? Because a lot of times you'll hear that common denominator as you're moving along. I can't work with Sally. She's, always negative. She's argumentative. Every time I try to talk to her, she's very defensive. Where do you go from that? Well, first, you have to understand what makes your people up. Those natural behavioral traits. So for me, that's what Omnia does. We're going to be able to tell you who's assertive, who's similar to you, who's going to be that person who may be so assertive that they're completely aggressive. We're going to talk to you about how they handle with that conflict. You have to understand your people to know how they communicate. And as a leader, you have to adapt your communication style to be able to communicate to them in the best possible way. Pace, because guess what? Some of your toxic employees are toxic for a season, and they're toxic because of change or organizational conflict that's going on. Or maybe they're toxic because of the structure. They feel like they're being micromanaged and they just want, tell me what my goal is and let me go for it. Or they feel like, okay, I'm not getting enough information. With us, with Omnia, we have our leadership development report. We also have our sales and service and professional development reports. That's going to help you understand your people, not just as part of that selection process, but also ongoing. It will also allow you to pinpoint, is that toxic employee only toxic towards one person, or are they toxic to everyone, and why? And some of it comes down, so the first reason that they may be toxic is because of how they handle conflict. So some of these people are like, you want some of this? Come on, come and get it. Let's deal with it. Other people are like, okay, I just want to just sit here. I'm going to let it go. Unfortunately, for those people who are toxic, who are like in your face, it's my way or the highway. This is the direction that we want to go. If it's that person who's like, okay, I'm going to just avoid it as soon as possible, just like water and can drops of water can fill up a glass, the same thing happens when it comes to conflict. They're going to let things build and build and build and build until all of a sudden it erupts in a mushroom cloud of toxicity that infects everybody in the office. So as leaders, your first thing that you need to do is to create some guidelines on how to deal with that conflict. Let's stop that toxic employee before they can really catch hold. One of that is by doing rules of engagement. This is how we're going to talk with each other. If something is bothering you, after 24 hours, you need to go to that person and have that discussion. Or if it's that person, your employer, or maybe it's even you who wants to address things right away, wait 24 hours on the little things. Is it something that's still bothering you? You want to set rules of engagement of sometimes the proper way to talk with people. Who's going to facilitate that conflict? So is that conflict facilitation, you want to avoid the triangle, because when you have the triangle, it creates a toxic environment. Plus it pulls other people into the area. So when I talk about the triangle, what I mean is instead of me going to the person such as, Pablo, and saying, Pablo, I have some, issues with this. You keep stealing my Diet Coke out of the refrigerator. Now I'm going to Regina and going, Regina, can you believe Pablo took my Diet Coke again? I don't know. It even has my name on it. And now Regina is put in that position of, do I take Kim's side? Do I defend Pablo? What if I'm in the, it's really not Pablo taking your Diet Coke. I'm taking it. And I'm letting him get blamed for it. If that person is the toxic employee. So by creating those rules of engagement and creating a safe environment where you are facilitating conflict resolution and not having to be the person who says, okay, this is over with, move on, you allow your team to talk with each other. And a lot of times toxic employees begin to build up because they're frustrated by situations, they are with other people who are negative, and there's not a safe environment for them to express themselves. As well as by creating those open lines of communication between your employees and between yourself, you're going to get a handle on that toxic employee before they really begin to take root in your office. And that's the thing that we want to avoid is, one, let's take care of that toxic. Let's determine, is it narrowed down to one person? And if so, what can we do to move forward with it to avoid it from infecting the rest of the team? And that is done through coaching, that is done through conversation, and it may be done through coaching them out. But when you have those open lines of communication, one, not only are you encouraging your team to come talk with you, but you're also encouraging them to talk to each other. So here's a scenario for you. James is your number one salesperson. Terrific, hits his numbers every single month. However, he can be a little bit difficult to work with. When he says jump, he expects the rest of your team to say how high, regardless of their position. You now have a new employee named Sally who's within the first 90 days, who James says, I need this report and I need it by 2 p.m. Sally responds with, James, I have other things in front of this. I will do my best to get it to you by 2 p.m. However, there's a queue and I'm not sure. James comes and complains to you. What do you do? Who first? Go ahead and type in the chat box. Who's right or wrong in that situation? Is it James for waiting to the last minute? Or is it Sally for saying, no, I can't take care of it? So go ahead, and as you're typing in the name, let me know why you believe that. So we're seeing some James and some Sally, both. James isn't considerate of Sally's time. Sometimes it's like your lack of time management is not my crisis. Sally's right because she's setting clear expectations. Right, so it's a shared responsibility. has a hard deadline. So both of them. But James is used to having his way. And he comes and complains to you as a manager, and now you're faced with a choice. Once again, do we talk about it? And even though Sally stated a clear expectation, was she being hard-headed? Because you know what? James thinks he gets his way all of the time. And now I'm just not going to do it. There's other things that are in front of it. I could probably let it go, but I'm not. So what that breakdown, and that's causing some conflict there, is no open lines of communication, right? And I see someone saying there needs to be some compromise. James should ask Sally if she can complete the task within the time frame. Both of them. So while Sally's being assertive and setting clear expectations, she wasn't also offering any options, And why is James waiting to the last minute? You've got to create that safe environment so that they can have those conversations. But a lot of times, if it's a top performer and they know that it's and your service team understands that they generate the sales, a lot of times they're not going to set those clear expectations until it reaches a point where it kind of explodes. So for you as a leader, you have to set those rules of engagement and then go back to it. So if James waited too long, and just because he thinks that he can speak a report into existence, he doesn't know all of the tips and the time and the steps that go into it, then you have that conversation with him about setting those clear expectations. If it's Sally, who's just saying, I'm not going to do it because it's him, then you have to take a step back and go, okay, how do I address this? And are you accidentally creating your own toxic employees? Think about that for a moment. As a leader, are you creating an environment where toxic employees can begin and that negativity spread? So I want you to ask yourself these questions. 1, who do I spend the most time with and why? Am I spending time with the top performers because they're the top performers, they're my superstars? Am I spending time with my low performers because everything's a crisis? Am I spending time with that mid-level, that great consistent employee who shows up, who may not always be at the top of the leaderboard, but rarely have issues with them for development? Ask yourself how much of your time is spent averting disaster. If 50 to 60% of your day is spent averting disaster, whether it's conflict between employees, whether it's an issue with a customer that is caused by an employee, you have someone toxic in your office. Ask yourself if there's a lot of drama, what is the common denominator? And then this is going to be the hard one. Am I allowing or causing the toxic environment to grow? If you are that leader who prefers to avoid conflict, then you may be contributing. You're watering the toxicity because you're not addressing it. And then, when did the toxic behavior start? Why is that important? Because there may be an outside reason that's causing those toxic behaviors. So what we tend to see is that employees or managers spend about 20% of their time with their meat and potato performers, right? What that means is those are those consistent people. It should not be that way. So should be 20% with your top performers, 60% with your core performers, and 20% with your low performers. A lot of times that number is skewed, where either they're spending 60% of your time with your top performer, or you're spending 60% of your time with your low performers, and your core performers are being ignored because they're dependable, they're consistent, they're doing what we're asking them to do. However, what happens is that regardless of whether they're a top, a core, or low performer, there are 3 different toxic employees that could be hiding in any of them. And so by spending your time with the majority of your employees, which will be your core performers, because think about it, you have your top 10%, you have your bottom 10%. 80% of your employees fall within that core performer, but yet you're not spending the most time with them. So you're ignoring most of your employees in that, okay, they're good, there's not a problem, I'm not having to stroke their ego because they're a top performer, I'm not having to coach them out. By them understanding, that's when, hey, Pablo took my Diet Coke again. Hey, I don't have you seen Kim? I know she's our boss, but I never see her anymore. Hey, did you hear, like, they're behind closed doors a lot. I wonder what's going on. Hey, did James Treat always give you deadlines? And now you see that toxic begin to grow. But let's talk about those three people, those three different styles that really start to grow in your in your toxic employees. And it's critical for you to understand who they are, and it's critical for you to identify them so you know how to coach them. The first one is your steamroller. They're aggressive. They're in your face. They can seem like a dictator. I need this report by 2 o'clock. Get it done. They're going to share their opinion regardless of the situation. So if they're in service, they're going to tell you what your salespeople need to do. If they're in sales, they're going to tell you what your service people need to do. Whether you've asked for their opinion or not, they're going to share it. Where that toxic behavior comes from is that people want to avoid them, or they begin to experience this, I'm better than everybody else. If you don't like it, you can move on, especially if they are that top performer. You know what? I generate $1 million in business. What do you do? And the other person may be thinking, I service your account so you can keep that $1 million book, but they avoid conflict. So it just kind of festers inside of them. If you have that steamroller, you want to really coach them on bringing down that aggressiveness. You want to have them set some clear guidelines with what you want from them. Hold them accountable. Just because you're a top performer does not mean that you can speak to people the way that you do. If you do not give them 24 hours in advance to pull a report for you, then your report will not be, the deadline won't be met. If they're sharing their opinion, have them share it with you instead of with the rest of the group. The second toxic employee we're going to talk about real quick is the blame shifter. They shift the blame for everything. They'll shift it to you. You didn't tell me you wanted it done that way. To the changing culture, well, that's not the way we've always done it. Maybe they blame the lack of knowledge. Well, I didn't know how to do it. Or this isn't going to work. Or she didn't do her part. Or, the manual is wrong. Or, the instructions are unclear. Instead of taking ownership. You want to make sure that with the blame shifter, going back to setting those clear guidelines, as you set those clear guidelines, you're going to give them the opportunity to ask questions. As you give them the opportunity to ask questions, then you're going to eliminate that blame shifting. The other way that you can eliminate that blame shifter, especially if it's a new employee coming on board, is having a clear-cut onboarding and training program. To say, here are the steps for onboarding. Here's what we expect for you. Here's your training steps. Here's the process so that they understand in advance. Making it clear when it is their responsibility to ask questions, as well as making it clear to them when you're going to give direction. If it's an existing employee who's maybe blame shifting about the culture or the way that things change, let's face it, our culture changes. As our business plans change, we're going to find better ways, more efficient processes, different systems. To say, if they say this isn't going to work, we'll offer a solution. What's the problem? What is your solution for it? The third person that you have to avoid is carefully disguised as the welcomer. They're that first person that comes in to say, hi, welcome to the team. We're so excited that you're here. Ron Clark has a great book out there called Move Your Bus. And if you don't know who Ron Clark is, he's a phenomenal educator in Atlanta. had a movie about him, but his book, Move Your Bus, really focuses on approaches to accelerating success in work and life. It talks a lot about in the education world, but can definitely be applied to the business world. And for in his book, Move Your Bus, he says, beware the bunt cake. Beware the employee who is always going up to welcome new employees, but they happen to be a little bit on the negative side. So we definitely want our new employees to feel welcome, but the welcomer will come in, grab those unsuspecting people, whether they're brand new to the company or they're new to the team, different department, and say, come on in, welcome, come sit. Hey, you want to go to lunch? Well, let me tell you, about 5 years ago, Kim's managing our service team, but about 5 years ago, she was just brought on board, and Wendy was managing it in advance, and all of a sudden it switched to Kim. I don't know what happened with this. They said it was a good thing. Or, hey, welcome to the team. I just want to let you know that, James has an issue with meeting deadlines. He gives you very short deadlines. And of course, he thinks that he's just the most important person in the office because he generated $1 million. All of those things, what are you hearing as I'm giving these examples? Am I really welcoming people? Go ahead and type them in your share, the questions and comments. Am I welcoming them or am I gossiping? Raise your hand if you think I'm just gossiping. So I see hands coming up all over the place. Am I really creating a good picture of what our environment is? And as a new employee, do I really want to walk into that? No, probably not. Go ahead and type in what you think about that welcomer. I see we've got multiple people typing. They're passive aggressive. I love that. They're gossiper. They like the drama. They are a manipulator, so they want to just kind of come in and plant their little seeds. Like they want to feel important. They find new people to create drama. And then if they're really good, they're going to sit back and, plant these seeds and cause problems, but then they go, oh, it's not me. So your welcomer can also be the blame shifter. I don't know why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. I don't know why. She's brand new. Why would she feel that way about James? Well, because you helped her feel that way. They want to spread the negativity. So the welcomer is the person that, the blame shifter, pretty evident. The steamroller, pretty evident. The welcomer is a little sneaky. And so when you're reviewing your team, you want to look at it to say, okay, who is my welcomer and what are their reasons behind it? Now, you will have that naturally outgoing person who just goes out of their way to greet people to make sure that they feel like they're part of the team, and that's great. But make sure that they're your positive welcomer and not your negative welcomer. Because if they're your negative welcomer, they are a toxic employee. And now you have to look at why are they being toxic? Is it situational? Is it something that's happening just for a moment because maybe they're overwhelmed? You've been shorthanded and now you finally have someone in, or you're shorthanded and there are no prospects in sight and your team is tired. And they're like, we're working 50 hours a week or we're working 40 hours a week, but we don't even have time for a lunch. We're feeling a little bit negative. That toxic can be there for a little bit. And what that does is it begins to create what we like to call here is disengage-itis. And so they begin to disengage. I don't want to be around people. I don't want to talk to people. I don't like what you're doing. It could be because of environment. They're just unhappy in the role. It could be that you moved me to CSR and I don't want to be a CSR. I want to be sales. Or we've said, you know what, you've done such a great job. We're going to promote you because we think everyone's natural inclination is to be promoted, right? Wrong. Some people are just happy where they are. They don't want to move forward. And so now you forced them into a role. And I feel like if I come and say, Diane, I really don't want to be a manager, now what's that going to look like on my career? Maybe that disengageitis is caused by their peers because they know that they're surrounded by people who are gossiping about them, or that they feel like you're here to do whatever I tell you to do when their work isn't being appreciated. Some of it is management. Ask yourself, if I'm spending the majority of my time with my top performers, who am I ignoring? Best way to do this is to make a list of everyone on your team that you directly manage and keep just a quick tally for a day of when you talk to them and why. If you go 24 hours without speaking to someone on your team, that can cause your employee to disengage. Now, if it's a remote employee, it's a little bit different. You may be communicating via email. But if you're in the same office and you haven't at least said good morning to an employee, then what you're telling them is that you're not important. We don't need you here. And that leads to them being disengaged. If it's a temporary disengagement, then you may be able to bring them back by beginning to have that dialogue, by beginning to talk with them. If you want to take it even further, is who haven't I talked to in 24 hours? Who haven't I talked to in 48 hours? Who haven't I talked to in a week and why? If someone's on PTO, that's great. That's their time off. But they're in the office and you haven't talked to them for a week, you may want to take a look at your leadership style. Because for our more analytical leaders, they tend to err more on the, why, if you're doing a great job, if you're doing a good job, you're getting a paycheck, you're doing good, don't worry about it. But if you're working with someone who's a more relational communicator, they need to know, they need to have some of that acknowledgement of their effort. So by the fact that you're saying, I'm just going to come and talk with you when there's a problem, they feel like, oh, now every time you walk towards them, I'm like, oh no, what did I do wrong? Here they come. So look at yourself to say, am I contributing to this disengageitis? And if so, how do I pull it back? And it's also cultural changes. So some of it is that their disengageitis is displayed in, I don't want to, I can't, I'm too valuable, or I'm a high producer. So I don't want to. These are the people who flat out say, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. Or they'll look at you and say, yes, I'll do it. But in their head, they're going, ain't happening. Is the disengageitis because they can't? I don't know how to do it, so I'm just not going to do it because I don't want to tell you I don't know how to do it. Having that conversation, having that coaching is going to allow you to. If someone thinks that they're too valuable, well, I'm kind of old school in my belief in that it's all hands on deck. We all do everything that's asked of us. So if I need to take out the trash, I'll take out the trash. Are you leading that by example? And yes, we may have high producers, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, is keeping this one person who is a high producer beneficial if I'm losing other people on the team, or if it's because it's creating a toxic environment? The other thing that can lead to some of that toxicity is the organizational conflict. So maybe the toxic employee is happening because they have conflicting common values. They just don't believe what the company believes. We see this toxic employee triggered a lot of times when there's a shift in culture. My CSRs were only servicing and now we're shifting to sales. They don't want to be a part of it. There's a lot of change, mergers and acquisitions. There's a high turnover of employees. Of management. If there's not communication happening, then the water cooler talk will happen. People will fill in the blanks, and a lot of times we fill in the blanks incorrectly. If you have a toxic employee, they're going to fill in the blanks with negative. So having that team meetings to be able to say, especially when there's change happening throughout the conflict, here's our next step. This is what we're doing. Here's where we're going. We'll keep them involved. Maybe the conflict is the task. I don't like to do it. If that happens, then what you may want to take a look at is the way that we've always done it the best way. And you may want to consider changing the processes. And a lot of times we see that organizational conflict occur and people being very toxic during mergers and acquisitions. They bought us. Why do we have to do it their way? Our way is better. Or we bought them and yet we're doing it that way. as a leader, the quicker you can pinpoint the origin of the toxic behavior, the quicker that you can begin to coach it. And once you determine their origin, then you can begin to set the stage. You want to begin to have a conversation with that toxic employee. Maybe you have it in a neutral environment where you go out to coffee or in a conference room. I know that some clients, and I love this, have, conversation corners where there's designated areas that are away from desk to have conversation. You want to make sure that as you begin to talk and address these toxic behaviors that you schedule the time to do it, and also schedule time for follow-up. So if it's something that needs to be addressed immediately, two employees are having a screaming match in your office in front of your customers, you've got to pull them out and have a conversation with them immediately. You may want to schedule a follow-up time where you can facilitate conflict resolution when the emotions are a little bit less, but you have to have that conversation and then say, I'm going to inspect what I expect. So here are the guidelines, here are the expectations. In a week, we're going to touch base about it. You want to prepare yourself. And I say prepare, prepare, prepare. It's like location, location, location. If you are not prepared, it will not go well. So with that preparation, what you want to do is if there have some hard facts on what those toxic behaviors are. You give short deadlines. When we were in a meeting, Kim was trying to talk, you constantly interrupted her. We've noticed that, as we're bringing you in, as we bring in new employees, you're constantly bringing them into things that have happened 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you want to communicate appropriately. So when we're dealing with toxic employees, especially if you're the leader who wants to address it right away, we tend to say, that is unacceptable and you need to correct it. Well, yes, that is true, but how we say it. One, we want to find out, here's what we think the origins are. But, Kim, I've noticed that there's been a change of your behaviors. You seem to be a more confrontational. There seems to be some, when dealing with customers, you're not making recommendations. You seem to be shorter. Here are some examples of that. Keep it very job specific. Keep the examples very factual. Take the emotion out of it and listen to what they say. You know what? Yes, I've been shorthanded. I have been short-tempered. And this is why. I've been doing the job of 3 people for the past 4 weeks. It doesn't seem to be noticed. It doesn't seem like anything's being done to change that. And I'm tired and I'm grumpy. Okay, so now you can address what those roots are. You can talk about that. 1, empathize with, we understand, thank you so much. I understand that as we've been training, as we're looking for a new employee, that everyone is picking up more than what they typically do. We appreciate that hard work. Here's what we're doing. We've got interviews scheduled, or we've got 2 people in training, and as soon as they're done with training, they'll be on the, in the office to eliminate that a little bit. If it's something that is a personal attack or it's going back and forth, you want to make sure that as you're scheduling that time, you schedule a time frame. You don't want to beat it to death. So remember, the blame shifter will blame everything else. They will also suck your time up as they're doing that, because as they're talking to you, you want to make sure that, well, it's not my fault, it's this person's fault. Well, it's not this person's fault, it's this person, it's this and this. And then now all of a sudden, there's like 2 hours gone and you're like, we've accomplished nothing. So as you begin that communication, 1, you want to walk into it, as I said, appropriately with the right attitude. It's us together. You hired them for a reason. They're on your team for a reason. Before you are ready to write them off, give them a chance to correct their behavior consistently. So by me saying, you need to correct this, this, and this, I'm telling them, this is what you're doing. Fix it. But if we work together to say, here are some behaviors that we're noticing, what is happening with this, it allows us to begin to have that open communication. As I said, you want to use facts, not feelings, and you want to prepare mentally. When you're dealing with a toxic employee, you want to make sure that your emotions are under control. And that's how you prepare mentally, because your toxic employees thrive on the drama. If you're feeling frustrated and it's something that can wait a few minutes, step away. If it's something that you know that they're going to come back with the blame shifting and the arguing, let's role play. Maybe you role play it mentally with yourself. Maybe you have another manager that you can talk through it. But you say, okay, worst case scenario, what could happen? Sometimes it's even with your top performers. With the worst case scenario, what happens if they walk out the door? How badly is it going to hurt our business? Can we deal with it? You want to know who you're meeting with. So with what I mean by that, knowing how do they communicate? How do they deal with conflict? How much structure do they need? With the Omnia, we have an entire suite of reports that can help you with that. And you want to state clear expectations. So it's not just saying this is what the issue is. These are the behaviors that are not acceptable. What do you expect for them to do? Is it to, if you have an issue with a coworker, you need to go directly to them within 24 hours to deal with the situation. After that, if there's not if there's not a solution, then you can come to me and we'll coordinate a conversation between the three of us. If it's something where they're short-tempered, give them the tools and the expectations. We don't yell at each other in the office. That violates our client experience and our rules for that. Plus, it's not professional. Here's what you can do. Or if that happens again, this is what will happen. There will be a corrective action. You will be sent home. You'll be suspended. You may not have a job. But state those expectations. And as you're doing that, give them some tools. So as I said, for Omnia, we have a complete suite of reports that you can use, that you can say, hey, here you're struggling with, sales. Let's talk about that. Here's your strengths. Here's your challenges. Here's where you and I are alike. Here's where we're different. This may be where some of that toxic behavior is coming from. As you begin to use those tools, as you give those tools to your employees, then you can circle back with them with what those clear expectations are. And definitely give them the next step. So it's not, you can't dictate to them, but what are you prepared to do next if the behaviors don't change? Maybe it's a coaching process where it's a 30, 60, 90-day PIP. Maybe it's probation. Maybe it is taking those, the next step is for you to begin to document everything that's happening so that you can document it in a way that is factual, that will meet your HR team's criteria. On 2/16/17, met with Kim regarding yelling at a coworker in the office. Explain the information. Or that toxicity may show up and just like, I come and go as I please. I know I'm supposed to be there at 8:30, but if I drag in at 8:45, that's okay, and I'm out the door at 5:15. Make sure that you're stating, this is what I expect. Here are the next steps. Work together with your employee for a solution. So remember, it's us together, not me versus you. One of the ways that you may do it is through the Employee Development Action Plan, which you'll be able to have this for a download at the end of the webinar today. Tell them have them write down 3 strengths that they have, 3 challenges that they have. What can they do to improve on those challenges? Now, I always say with the challenges, raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise not to list challenges I have no control over. It can't be something that I need better technology, more money, and better hours. What are some of the challenges I'm having? I'm struggling. The challenge that I may be having is I don't understand the products that you're asking me to cross-sell. We've changed the process and I need additional training. I just don't like John. So one of my challenges is I need conflict resolution. How do I work with someone I just don't like with? Maybe it is my challenge is setting clear expectations for my teammates. And then that resources that they need from you. Once again, it's a partnership. As you have your employees complete this, what it's going to do is allow them to write down those challenges, give themselves a 3, 6, and 12-month goal, and set those goals with them. So if you tell someone what to do, if it doesn't work, then that's the blame shifter is going to go, well, I didn't set that goal. You set that goal for me. by having them set the goal and coming alongside them and supporting them and making sure that the goal is something that's, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, it's timely, it's something that we can say, yes, we're seeing improvement on, is going to allow you to hold them accountable, but also lets them take ownership. Now, if they don't believe that they're a toxic employee, still have them complete this, because once again, you're beginning to build that foundation of this is where we need to move forward. Once you have that development action plan in place, then you want to start coaching the plan. We have some great forms. You want to observe the information. You want to make sure, once again, that you're clearly stating the expectation, the goal, what the priority. They may have a whole laundry list of things that need to be done, but what are you focusing on first? As you begin to observe the behaviors, both the behaviors improving or if the behaviors are staying the same, give them immediate feedback. And then this is always hard. So for toxic employees, a lot of times, just like they become very negative, the team becomes very negative against them. And as a manager, we can think, they're never going to improve. So make sure that you're recognizing the success. We have a coaching companion form. You can download it at the end of our webinar today, and it's great. It's real quick and easy, but it has a place on there for did wells. Here are some of the things that you did well. Is it 100% where you want it to be? Maybe, maybe not, and that's okay, but you're recognizing that they're moving forward. You want to recognize 2 or 3 of those did wells, and then you want to circle back to say, okay, here's where we are, and this is where we need to be. Here's a couple of things to do to move forward. Your truly, truly, truly toxic employee is going to not surprise you, and they're not going to change. However, for you, if you're giving them consistent coaching, you're having those frequent conversations, you have your documentation in order, then it's not going to be a surprise for them when you have that conversation to say, at this time, we believe it's best to part ways. Because at the end of the day, a toxic employee, regardless of whether they're a top performer or a low performer, is not something that you want to keep in your office. You want to give them every opportunity to improve, but if they don't, then you want to make sure that you are not forgetting the human factor to make sure it's situational and not truly who they are, but if it's truly who they are, once you're consistently coaching them, once you're having that documentation in order, then now you have options to say, if we see this behavior again, this is what's going to happen. And then the best way to avoid those toxic employees is to hire slow and fire fast. So a lot of times we reverse that, right? So we're like, oh no, I need a body. My team's getting frustrated, so let me hire. The problem is we hire people who may not be a good fit to the job. They may not have the skills. Now, the more that they're feeling frustrated, the more that that's carrying over, or it begins to create that toxicity in your team. Checking for references as well to hear what other people think about them. I'm a big believer of looking at social media. Now, you can't use that as a disqualifier, but look at their social media. If there are constant rants on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, that may be something that they're going to bring into your office. Do you want that in your office? Or is it something that you can ask additional questions? Tell me about your worst supervisor. Tell me about, if you could create the ideal work environment, what would it be? Compare that to who you're looking for. And if it's someone that, that toxic employee, start the coaching process as quickly as possible. Work through it, but don't say, okay, I've seen some improvement for 6 months. Now they're right back to where they are. And you're on this crazy toxic cycle for years and years and years before you say, okay, I can't deal with it anymore. Go ahead and deal with it as quickly as possible. And I want to leave you with this quote by Ronald Reagan before we go into Q&A to say, peace is not absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. The tools that we've talked about today is going to allow you to deal with that toxic employee to say, here is a way to handle this logically, calmly, correctly, consistently, which is key. And as we handle that, yes, there's going to be some bumps in the roads. There's going to be some conflict. But at the end of the day, it's going to come together wonderfully. We are going to have our webinar next month, Behavioral Interviewing, the secret to uncover the most about your candidate will be there. We also have our takeaways where you can download not only a copy of the presentation, but also our coaching companion and development plan that's there. And I'm excited to say we now are offering an applicant tracking system. It's very functional. It's designed with our small businesses in mind. Very affordable. What I love about it is that it works within the Omnia application, so you can send out the assessments at the same time and create job postings and publish to Indeed.com. You get your own branded job board, and we'd love to talk with you. So I'm seeing a question is, when I check references, most people can't state anything but dates of service and positions. And that's true. We've gone to very much this where it's very legalistic, so to speak. So what I would say to you is, one, look at the time frames. How long were they at that position? And then if it's something that, ask, just say, could I, is there anything I need to know about this employee? The other thing I would do is look at LinkedIn, because a lot of times coworkers and peers or supervisors will endorse someone else on LinkedIn. Do they have any other endorsements from previous coworkers or supervisors? Because that would give you a little bit of insight as well of what their coworkers would think about it. If you're interested in learning more about our applicant tracking system, please feel free to give me a call or email me. I'll be more than happy to talk with you. My information is in that top box. And once again, it is HRCI accredited. So you'll be receiving a certificate in the next week or so that you can use for your continuous ed. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your patience as we've had some technical issues, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you very much.